This meeting is being recorded.
All right, the Southfield Area Chamber of Commerce is excited to have you today for this webinar. We are going to be discussing the stimulus money and beyond. Our conversation today is hosted by ELE Wealth Management and ELE-Peagler LLC. Our guests that will be coming live talking to you are Diana Pegler. Mrs. Pegler, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, welcome. We're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you.
All of our guests that are on the call, just for general housekeeping, we're going to go ahead and mute everyone except for the panelists on this call. If you have questions during this conversation, you are welcome to engage. We're very excited to engage with you during the discussion. Please use the chat box. In the chat box, I'll go ahead and type a message now so that you'll all see where that is. If we're all on the same page, go ahead and type a 1 in the chat box so I know that you see where the chat is. Our second guest that we'll have on the panel, thank you, I see that, Mrs. Pegler. Thank you, Jason, I see. If you see the 1 in the chat box, we're all on the right track. Our second guest today is none other than Mr. Ellis Liddell. Mr. Liddell, can you hear us?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. There's a bit of an echo, but that is okay. We will work with that. If at any time you get disconnected, please feel free to hop back in on the call. Thank you. I see your 1s and your Ys. I appreciate it. So I'm going to go over introductions and letting you know a little bit of background about our guests. Mrs. Diane Pegler is the president of ELE-Peagler LLC of Greater Detroit area. Since 2016, in partnership with Ellis N. Liddell, a graduate of the University of Detroit, Mercy, a certified annual filing season program tax professional, and a tax professional for over 20 plus years for individual small business estates and trusts. She is a City of Southfield retiree and over 17 years in the banking industry. Welcome, Mrs. Diane Pegler. We're glad to have you on the call.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to the Southfield Area Chamber of Commerce for hosting this webinar. And you've heard a presentation previously talking about federal aid from the government in this COVID-19 environment. Our presentation today is going to be the perspective of recipients of this federal funding. ELE Wealth Management was the recipient of PPP, the Paycheck program, whereby your payroll and utilities and other items can be included. ELE Wealth Management also was a recipient of funds from Oakland County. I was a recipient, ELE-Peagler LLC, of the EIDL, which is the economic injury. So we want to give you a perspective of how it impacted us and give you the perspective of tax implications if there are any. So with that introduction, Mr. Liddell.
All right, so good afternoon. The interesting thing, also, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jasmine. And hopefully you guys are not getting too much of an echo. You are. I can tell from the expression on Jasmine's face.
We can hear the echo. Maybe just turning the volume down a little bit on the back speaker portion will help. But we can hear you. It's okay.
Okay. All right, let's try that. How about now?
It's a little better.
Is that better?
Yeah.
A little better. Okay. All right. So, you know what?
I might do this too. Let's mute this because it doesn't work anyway. How about now? That should be really good.
That's better.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So obviously my computer was trying to throw out a little sound. It couldn't throw it all out. All right. So the key reason why we're here today is to try and give some understanding to what has occurred with regards to this country and what's going on within the markets themselves. The big challenge for most small businesses is that you can't have customers right now. That's your biggest challenge, which is what encouraged many of us to apply for the Paycheck Protection program. The whole idea in the early phases of this program was, if you keep your employees, you'll be rewarded for having kept your employees because this money was coming. And one Forbes columnist said it best. He said it was like the gold rush. Everybody wanted to go and get this free money. And as we look at everything today, we realize it wasn't free money. It was, the forgiveness is tied to a number of factors which are very unclear to the public, to small businesses. Basically, left the interpretation of forgiveness up to your banker. So if you have a very liberal banker, the liberal banker may say, oh, you met the standard of qualification. If you have a very tough banker who reads those rules and interprets them as, if you don't use 75% exactly of your money towards paycheck protection, then you did not qualify. So that leaves too much ambiguity out there. So we have to have some clarity, and hopefully Congress will give us some clarity. But as of right now, the average loan was $206,000. That doesn't mean everybody got $206,000 by no means. It just simply means that was the average loan, because if you recall, some people got $10 million because they redefined what a small business was. And our small business today, 500 employees or less, you qualify. Well, there's a huge difference between ELE Wealth Management, ELE-Peagler and Associates, and a company that has 500 employees. So the same rule has to try and apply to everyone, and that's what makes it so interesting. So I'm going to start here. A lot of companies was forced with the decision, do I ask my people to go and apply for unemployment? Do I lay them off? Or do I simply hold on to my employees, spend through my savings to try and keep everybody here? Well, let's imagine that you're a restaurant, and you're a small restaurant, and the governor has an order right now that you have to shelter in place. So you can only do takeout orders. So do you need as much of a staff for takeout business as you do for dine-in? The answer is no. Do you keep paying your employees while they're trying to dine in? People can't dine in, but the employee was a waitress, and you don't need them for the takeout purposes. So the challenge that everyone's faced with is, what do I do? And let's just say that you were a landscaper, and until last week you were closed down. You couldn't even do landscaping. So a lot of people couldn't work. That came about something else. The government was ahead on this one. They did what they call gig workers. You work a gig. So that introduced a new concept called pandemic unemployment assistance. So pandemic unemployment assistance, they made it wide open where everyone could apply for it. This is the first time that you could apply for unemployment and you never paid into the system. Why? Because the federal government used the state government to distribute. It became a distribution network. They used the banks to be a distribution network. So everyone is being a distribution network to distribute money that the federal government passed and wanted to get into people's hands. So that's how, as Ms. Pegler said when we first started, that's how that Oakland County, Wayne County, the various counties throughout Michigan, that's how they got funding so that they could in turn fund their small businesses through grants. That's why the SBA PPP loan or EIDL loan allowed you to apply for an advance up to $10,000. Well, they redefined that. Initially, it was $10,000 for everybody. Then they decided it's only $1,000 per employee. So a lot of people thought they were going to get $10,000, ended up getting $1,000, up to $10,000. What if you had 50 employees? You got how much? $10,000. You only got the max that was based on 10 people. So the rules have changed slightly as they went. Now, small businesses who initially applied thought, I've got a year to spend this money. So when the governor gives the order that we can bring everybody back to work, this money is sitting in my account, I can now use this money. That's not what happened. What happened was you have 60 days from the moment of funding. We, Ms. Pegler, were funded on Thursday. So we have 60 days from this past Thursday to pay out this money. Well, we made payroll early because of the bank situation. So we wanted employees to have time to get to the bank, get their check cashed in case they drove by and it was long lines, they wanted direct deposit. We wanted to make sure we covered that. So we paid everybody a week early. So we missed one of the pay periods by paying them a week early. So now, do we make up for that by paying them a week early on the back end so that we can stay within our 60 days of spending? Those are the kind of challenges that everyone's now faced with and trying to figure out, how do I make this work given these changes to the situation? We thought we had a year to spend the money. Now we have 60 days to spend the money. And what if you paid your bills? You paid your utility bill. You paid your mortgage interest. You paid those things early before you got funded. Well, if you paid it out of your money, it doesn't count towards the forgiveness. So there's some challenges that are in the system. Now, if you're a small business and you say, you know what, a 1% loan is a great loan. I don't mind having a 1% loan. Then it means you're prepared to pay the money back. But if you got this money hoping that it was going to be free money, then you're now wondering, how am I going to meet the qualifications to make this happen? So I want to just lay the foundation. So what we wanted to cover is the pandemic unemployment insurance assistance. We wanted to cover the EIDL, the PPP, and then the last thing I'm going to cover is business interruption insurance. A lot of small businesses actually have an insurance policy that says if we interrupt it, money comes to my staff. Well, a lot of insurance companies are not interpreting it to say a virus is not a threat. Well, it's not in the policy. We reviewed my personal business interruption insurance policy. There's nothing about virus in my policy. Now, do they give you some examples in the policy? Absolutely. They mention fire, water. There's a number of things they mention that can cause you not to be able to enter your building. Well, what if a person came to your office who had the virus and died from it? Can you enter that building? What happened early on? They closed many buildings here in Southfield. And they said you couldn't enter the building because someone had an issue in the building. They didn't say what the issue was, but they had an issue. And then later on, you found out the issue was the coronavirus, which was changed to COVID-19. So ideally, insurance companies say, whoa, you can't have people going in and out that building after someone died from the disease. Well, has your business been interrupted? Yes. So we're going to finish up with that, but I wanted to just give Ms. Pegler an opportunity to tell you about if you're receiving pandemic unemployment assistance, because a lot of people have already started getting their check. So we're going to talk about what happens after you get your check. So Ms. Pegler, if you could just enlighten them on what's going to happen from a tax perspective.
Okay, glad to do that. Let me start out by giving a disclaimer. We're all in uncharted territory right now in terms of rules and regulations. I will tell you what I know today. Stay tuned for tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. But hopefully I'll be able to give you some resources that you can stay on top of the information. With the pandemic unemployment compensation, $600 a week. If you remember nothing else, remember that your state unemployment and this federal pandemic unemployment compensation, they are taxable events. This is critical to understand. And so when you sign up for it, if there's an opportunity for you to fill out a form W-4V, which is voluntary withholding, do it if you can afford to do it. I know a lot of people have been waiting to get their money and they need to live on this money. However, at the end of the year, and when you file your 2020 tax return, this is when everything comes to fruition. And this is where the greatest impact is going to be, because you're going to have to pay tax on that money, not only to federal, but to state. And if you're in a local community that has local tax, you'll pay there as well. So that is, if you remember nothing else from this segment, know that this is taxable income and you should have some tax withheld. Well, how much should you have withheld? It's hard to say because everybody's situation is different, but knowing what your tax bracket is based on whether or not you're single, you're married filing joint, you're married filing separate, head of household, qualifying widower. Knowing that might help you in terms of the tax rate. The other thing is based on your filing status. There's a standard deduction that the government gives you. That might help you. The tax brackets, just so you know, are 10%, 12%, 22%, 24%, 32%, 35%, and 37%. This becomes important because you're having tax withheld from your unemployment, but now when you file your tax return, you're adding it to all your other sources of income. For example, married filing joint, both sources of income. If you've got Social Security, you've got wages, you've got bank interest, all these different sources come into play. So that's another reason why you need to have tax withheld. Pretty much that's about it on unemployment. I think that most people are able to get in right now. The thing that I suggest, if you're unable to access the website, do it at off-peak times, like real late at night or real early in the morning. Hopefully you're able to get in. Sources of information. The state of Michigan has an absolutely wonderful website in terms of gathering information. And you would go to www.mi.gov/UIA. There's also another good article to read, and it's from Nixon Peabody, and that is www.nixonpeabody.com. And I belong to professional associations, and we're constantly getting updates on what's going on. So if you're not sure, call ELE-Peagler LLC, and we're more than happy to update you on what it is that we know. Mr. Liddell.
I would like to formally introduce Mr. Liddell. I wanted to make sure that we all know, we're grateful to have you on the call, but I want to make sure that we know about your credentials too. Mr. Ellis Liddell is the president, CEO, and CCO of ELE Wealth Management. He is a regular guest on 1200 AM's Inside Detroit radio program hosted by Mildred Gaddis, and has appeared on television programs as an expert on investments. He has appeared in Detroit on the Detroit Channel 7 Action News and PBS television. His motto, "Wealth is our legacy, pass it on," is at the forefront of every decision to serve the community and to create wealth management in everyone's household. I wanted to make sure that we got your credentials in, but please, you're sharing so much good information and we're learning so much. And if you have questions during this webinar for either Mr. Liddell or Mrs. Pegler, please make sure to place your questions in the chat box. Go ahead, Mr. Liddell.
All right, thank you for that. All right, still no echo, right? We're good?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so let me just touch on something. A lot of people say, I'm having a hard time getting through to the state of Michigan to get the money. The state of Michigan, in all fairness, had 1,000 claims per day being filed prior to this pandemic. They're now having 10 to 20,000 people going on per day. It's going to shut down the system when that happens. Your main job, if you're the person trying to get into the system, is to do what? Get the money. That's your job. So if that means getting up at midnight to go on there and check out the status, then do it. The biggest problem they were having were some people's Social Security numbers were so close that they're finding that it looks like that person already had an account. Well, you didn't have an account, so therefore you don't know your password. You have to speak to a person to get them to unlock that, because they can't take the entire system down because of 1% error rate, because you would hurt more people than you would help. So just know if you're having challenges getting through, call the 800 number and go from there. So the pandemic unemployment assistance, who qualifies? Everybody under the sound of my voice. A small business owner, you are not able to make as much money as you were making. You're making 30% of what you were making, but you're still trying to hang on to your employees. It's okay. Apply for it. Let the state tell you no. Don't tell yourself no. Because a lot of people are saying, but I don't qualify. You've got to think about it this way. If this pandemic comes back in October and you can't work for 4 months, are you still going to be able to pay your mortgage, your utilities, your credit cards, your car payments, truck payments if you have a truck that you're leasing? You should have already made those phone calls to get 3 to 6 months relief on your personal mortgage, on your personal car. You've got to assume the worst and pray for the best. And if you're assuming the worst and you don't have 3 to 6 months worth of money to cover your bills, then that tells you that you need to take advantage of the government assistance, because that's what it's designed for. It's designed to be a bridge to help you get across. But again, you've got to participate, which means you've got to do the extra work, which is call in there and get yourself signed up. Now, that's the pandemic part. Now let's go to the EIDL. A lot of people need to know about the EIDL. That money was designed, and that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Emergency Fund, an advance. A lot of the reason why this target was small business, you heard so much about the PPP, is because the Economic Disaster Relief Loan was done earlier. It was done before we even knew the pandemic was as bad as it's going to be. That $10 million and $20 million you heard about them talking about giving back, that money wasn't part of the PPP. They got that money as a result of the EIDL. Now, Ms. Pegler got in on the tail end of the EIDL when she applied for the grant. When by the time I applied, a week later, it was already PPP. So some people are saying, but I applied for both. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, because they took one down and put the other one up. By the time I applied, they had put up the PPP, taking down the EIDL. So the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Emergency Advance was given to primarily to large corporations, not to small ones. The small businesses came in on this next topic, which is the PPP. And Ms. Pegler, I'm not throwing the ball back to you for the EIDL, because most people who got it that are watching were small companies who got the grant only.
Correct.
But you can't address it. Do they have to pay the grant back? I think we ought to at least say.
The grant that ELE-Peagler LLC received, there was no email, there was nothing. All you saw was a deposit into your bank account, and there is no reporting required on that amount of money. If there was a requirement on your part, you would have received a communication from the Small Business Loan Association regarding what the rules were governing the funds.
And we actually spoke with the SBA, a representative at the SBA, to give you the information we're giving you now. We discussed it with her, and she said basically, unless you applied for a loan, and information will follow by email from the SBA, the grant was just an advance, and it was based on employees that you kept. So, email just to make sure, because as Ms. Pegler said, everything we're talking about is fluid, it's subject to change. So initially, there was no paperwork, nothing came with that. You just got money deposited into your account. But just don't ignore your emails, because if they send something out saying, hey, we changed our mind, Congress voted on this, Congress changed that, it's subject to change. Everything we're talking about is fluid. Is that it on that, Ms. Pegler?
Yes, sir.
All right. The PPP, Paycheck Protection. Many of you are sitting around. I know a guy who got $32,000 who runs a transportation business. I know another person that got 50-some thousand. So there are different amounts that people got based on your payroll, but everybody's faced with the same situation. What do I do now that I have the payroll amount? What do I do that I got this money and I can't spend it in 60 days? Is there a way to work around? We don't know. The answer to that is you're going to have to continue to watch the news, Google, and just ask the question every day for a while. Do I have to spend this money in 60 days for PPP? And hopefully one day you'll see something that says you have longer than 60 days. But as it stands today, as of this recording, you have 60 days from the day you were funded. Now, the other person you can check with, though, is your bank. Whichever bank loans you the money, they're going to give you guidance on that. And before I forget, in order to get forgiveness, you actually have to apply for forgiveness. It's not a given. You have to apply for it. You have to call your bank and say, hey, can I get the application that shows proof that I used this money the way I said I was going to use it, and it was used, and my loan should be forgiven? If you don't make that phone call to the bank, they're not going to call you. So you have to request an application for forgiveness. You complete that and send it back to the bank. Otherwise, the bank's going to assume you chose to do the 1% loan. So it takes a positive action on your part to get the forgiveness. It's not just forgiveness. Now, Ms. Pegler, talk about this PPP money and the expenses that you were allowed to use to pay for it, as far as payroll, as far as all those things you chose to use it for, they were qualified expenses that they told you could use it for. What happens from a tax perspective?
What happens is in the CARES Act, it originally said that you could use the money for whatever you needed it to be used for. The Small Business Loan Administration changed the rules. They said that you have to spend 75% on payroll and 25% for rent, utilities, mortgage interest, etc. So the guidance right now put out by the IRS, and it's notice 2020-32. Let me repeat that. Notice 2020-32, and that is an IRS regulation that says that you cannot deduct your expenses when you've used your PPP money to pay for those items. They perceive it as double dipping. And so that is really, really important for people to understand. And how that's going to impact your tax return when you file it, I'm not quite certain, because there's so many other factors associated with preparing the return. But the thing that you need to know is that if you use PPP money to pay for payroll, utilities, rent, mortgage interest, then you cannot deduct it on your tax return. Really, really important. Now, the other part of it is if any part is deemed a loan, the interest rate is between 1% and 4%. Your repayment period is 10 years. The interest on that loan, though, would be an eligible expense deduction on your tax return. And there are no loan fees or prepayment penalties on that. The other thing is they're being very stringent about when you spend the money. It has to be, like Mr. Liddell said, 60 days. Another way to say it, and what you'll see in the literature, is exactly 8 weeks from the date the money was deposited into your bank account. It needs to be spent. Again, 75% has to be allocated to payroll, 25% to utilities, mortgage interest, or rent. I would be happy to entertain any questions on that, but the fact that your expenses that you pay associated with this PPP money is not an eligible deduction on your tax return. Mr. Liddell?
All right. Well, thank you for that. I guess, thank you. I don't know what's appropriate when your heart's being broken. It's like when you get stopped by the police and give you a ticket, you're like, thank you, I think. But it's always thank you. All right. Thank you, Ms. Pegler. Okay. So the PPP
Is it okay
money,
to ask a question on this topic?
Oh, go on.
Yes, we will have,
Jasmine,
you can, hi. If you have questions, please place your questions in the chat room, and we're going to open up for discussion for questions after the final presentation point. So yes, you may ask questions. If you could place it in the chat box so we know who to unmute, that would be great. And then we will leave time for that, because I see a couple questions already in the chat box that we'll address. We just want to have the presentation portion completed first. Go ahead, Mr. Liddell.
Okay. So the last aspect of what we're talking about is the business interruption insurance. And I gave you a slight preview, but just to repeat it. Most business owners have a business insurance policy. If indeed you have a business insurance policy, you need to call your agent and tell them that you want to file a claim for business interruption. Now, on the news, a lot of people, the state of Pennsylvania, legislators voted that this qualifies as a business interruption. The state of Michigan very well might vote that it does, but if they do, and it takes them, say it takes them a year to get around to voting that it should be qualified, a covered expense. But if you don't file a claim 6 weeks after your injury, you disqualify yourself from being eligible for this business interruption insurance payment. So I called my agent. I requested they start the claims process. I got a call from a claims examiner. She asked me several questions. And in hindsight, unless you know the answer, don't. Ask them to email you the questions and you'll get back to them. If you know the answer, it's okay, because keep in mind, you're on a recorded phone line. Whatever you say will be used in the future either for you or against you. So you just want to be sure. One of her questions to me was, has anyone died? Has any of your clients died from the COVID-19? It was an easy answer for me because the answer was yes. We've had about 5 different clients who passed. And the second question was, did anyone visit your facility in the last 30 days? Well, we've been home for the last 30 days, so the answer to that was no. But if she said 30 days before March 23rd, it could have been a yes. One of the people, it was a yes. So then the follow-up question was, have you had your facility cleaned since you all went to stay home? And the answer to that was yes. So you just got to make sure you have the right answers to those questions, because they're asking you those questions and they're recording those questions. They're recording your answer. So if you don't know the exact answer, you can't stand behind it, have them email it to you and get it back to them and let them know that you are in a state where that you are not mentally ready to answer those questions. So business interruption insurance needs to be filed if indeed you have it, so that you can be turned down, so that if in a year the legislature votes it should have paid, now you're eligible. But your policies, most policies say that if you don't file a claim within 6 weeks of the incident, you're no longer eligible for that claim. So it's okay for them to tell you no. It leaves room for you to open the case back up later. But if you don't file at all, then you didn't follow the procedure that's outlined in your policy. So you just want to make sure that you do it properly. All right, that kind of concludes, Ms. Patton, what I wanted to cover, and Ms. Pegler and I, so we can go to some of the questions unless Ms. Pegler has something she wants to add.
Ms. Pegler, do you have anything to add before I go into the question section?
No, I'm actually looking at some of the questions, formulating an answer.
Okay, perfect. Well, I see some of you have placed questions in the chat box. I believe the first question was in regards to disability. Are you able to apply for benefits if you are currently receiving disability? Mr.
All right.
Okay.
I'll take it, Ms. Pegler. It's not so much that you are disabled that makes you not qualified, disqualified. If you're working and disability, because you're able to make just under $20,000 being disabled. So if you were working a job part-time and you got let go, then you're eligible. Now, let's just say you're a disabled person, but you had a landscaping business that you were working, and you were not been able to start your landscaping until this week. You're also eligible for the gig work under the gig work part of the pandemic unemployment assistance. So the answer to your question is possibly.
Okay. We have a second question. What items qualify as payroll for PPP forgiveness?
They open that up. 1099s actually count at this time. So 1099s as well as W-2 wages. You just have to be able to prove that you were paying someone. So if you gave them a 1099, let's say you didn't get around to giving them a 1099 yet because the tax year was expanded, then as long as you show proof through canceled checks, or that you show proof that the 1099s, you have the 1099s. In fact, you may want to add to that.
You pretty much answered it. There's a little brief formula for the forgivable portion of the PPP, and it goes something like this. Forgivable portion equals these things: payroll costs plus applicable mortgage interest payments plus covered utility payments. Just keep that in mind as you are expending the money, and keep that range of 75% payroll, 25% other.
Ms. Pegler, we have received lots of questions from solo entrepreneurs, solo business owners. Are they able to tap into the PPP loan, and how should they, if they are so, how should they show paying out payroll as a sole one individual company?
Right. Keep in mind, for the PPP, if you're using PPP money to pay payroll or utilities, it's not an eligible deduction. But can you qualify to apply for PPP? The answer is yes, as a sole proprietor.
Understood.
And just to add to that, Ms. Patton?
Yes.
Just to add to that, if you're if you're a sole proprietor and you're making less than say $200,000 a year, the first $100,000 help you to qualify for the PPP. But because you're just a sole employer, you also qualify for the pandemic unemployment assistance. So you qualify for the unemployment, especially if you're not able to work. That's been my advice to others, to go after that money first while waiting on the PPP. The PPP is so tied to you having a relationship with a banker. I think this is probably the first, no, this is one of the few times that your relationships make a huge difference. Now, a lot of people go to the window when they go to the bank. They don't really know their branch manager. They don't have a business banker. They've never had a need for it. Well, now you have a need to know somebody at the bank other than the lady who cashes your check. And even though she's very important, this is the first time in a long time that knowing a banker gets you to the top of the pile, not knowing a banker. Those who have banking relationships, they got phone calls from their banks telling them that the PPP money was coming around before it was announced on TV, because they had to get the banks ready, remember? But those who don't have a relationship with a banker, they found out on the media, on the news. And anytime you find anything out on the news, you're already late. So they found out late, and some of them still don't have a relationship, so they can't call the bank up and say, what do I need to do? So when you come out of this, one lesson you want to take with you is that you've got to have a business relationship with a banker. That it's important to know someone other than the person cashing your check.
Excellent.
Let me throw in another comment. When you do file your return, your business return, if you have a business registration other than being incorporated, there's such a thing called qualified business income deduction. What that does is that if you have a net profit on your business, then you are eligible to deduct 20% of those profits from your taxable income. So we have to have some kind of silver lining at the end of the day. And that is one of the positive things that when you file your tax return. And to follow up on what Mr. Liddell said, I can't stress enough your relationship. Just like you need a banker, you need a doctor, you need a lawyer, all of those things. If you haven't already done it, start doing it now.
Thank you. We have a question. I think this would go to you, Mrs. Pegler. Can you speak more about the money that you stated that appeared in your account that was a deposit? Denise is asking, can you speak more about money appearing in your account for unemployment relative to the SBA loan application?
Well, the money that I received was an EIDL grant. And there was no obligation. There's no reporting that is required for that money. The deposit actually showed that it was from the SBA, and there's nothing that I have to do with that. With the unemployment, at the end of the year, you're going to receive a 1099 for unemployment that you've received, a combined amount, both what you receive from the state and what you receive from the pandemic unemployment, which is the federal government. I hope I answered that.
I'm going to check in with Denise to make sure that that covered her full question. We have another question to both panelists. The Federal Registrar State says that FICA, federal income tax, and FUTA need to be excluded from payroll calculation for loan forgiveness. It's not asking a particular question, but do either of you want to address that comment?
Ms. Pegler?
I don't really do payroll. I'm not familiar with it. I've seen some writing on it, but again, it gets back to whether or not it's deductible today and not deductible tomorrow. I think we need to keep reading on this. There's been a lot of discussion in my tax professional community about this. And as it stands right now, it can be, but we just don't know at this particular point. So stay tuned with that. And if you've got PPP, read your document from that lender in terms of what you can and cannot do. That's extremely important because your reporting is going to go back through them.
We have a question.
And I went through the frequently asked questions, Ms. Patton. I went through the frequently asked questions from my lenders from the loan that I signed.
Okay.
And the frequently asked questions, they keep updating that. So that the bank sent out a website. So make sure you go into the bank's website to check frequently asked questions, because that will also address whether you can take this FICA, FUTA, FICA, FUTA, and all the things that was mentioned. It'll let you know, because that's fluid. That's one of those things that's changing as we go. So I can't overemphasize the fact that you gotta check the information.
Thank you. Denise said that did answer her question, Mrs. Pegler, so that was great. We have a question that we receive a lot at the chamber in regards to knowing that different money is going to be taxed. Is there a recommendation of how much money should be put aside in regards to the tax that some of the business owners are concerned about that may come later down the line?
As I mentioned with regard to the unemployment, if you know what your tax bracket is, or what the standard deduction is for your filing status, that's going to help you a little bit. I do have a mathematical formula that we can use, but I'd rather maybe do it on an email and send it to the person, because everyone's situation is definitely very different. But if you know your tax bracket, your filing status, and what the standard deduction is associated with that filing status, that should help you. My guidance is usually from unemployment, if you can do 10%, that's the base. And then Michigan is 4.25%.
Thank you. There are not any additional questions right now in the chat room. I will leave space for any final words before turning it back over to tell you about what webinars are upcoming next. I just had one come in. Will there be another round of grant funding for the EDIL grant program? Have we heard about that yet?
I haven't.
There's going to be more funding, not so much for the EIDL actually, but not for that one. Because keep in mind, that was, you didn't hear much about that before it happened. So the Paycheck Protection seems to be the way they want to go, and to get more money into small businesses. There's currently money right now that's being deployed. So if you haven't applied for it, call your bank and go on and apply for it. Now, it seems to be that the bank now has the money, so you call around and find a bank that has it. A lot of the banks are territorial, so they're trying to take care of their customers first. But some of the smaller banks, also PayPal, American Express, some of the credit card companies are also banks. They have monies too. And in that case, you don't need to know your banker. So you want to call up PayPal if you use PayPal. You want to call up Square if you use Square. You want to be able to find out who else did I do business with that might have this money, because a lot of those companies did get the money. So you want to try your banker. If they tell you that we're out of funding or we're not taking any more applications, then call PayPal. If PayPal says the same thing and you had an American Express card, call them. But just know that there's plenty of sources out there that still have some money. Small credit unions, small banks. So some of those other places out there have it. So your job is to get the money. I said that earlier today. Your job is to get the money. So use every resource possible to try and get the money. And also just try and think ahead. Think about what happens the next time around. What is your news source? You know, I didn't see a lot on Facebook about this money before it hit. So if your only news source is Facebook, you might want to add one more news source to your book that can give you some real information. So you just want to look at all of that going forward, because that's going to make it possible for you to compete. You've got to be strategic. We just went into a period of time in 2020 where we understand a strategist. Why is a strategist important? And this is the most important time to be a strategist ever. So this decade is a decade of strategy. It came in. You've got to figure out how to make things work for your family, for your household, and believe it or not, your employees are your family. You spend more time with them than you do other people. So you got to figure out, how do I make it work for my employees? How do I stay ahead of the curve? And how do I have the right advisors on my team? As Ms. Pegler said, you know, you need to have people before you need them. So you should establish a relationship with a banker. You should establish a relationship with an attorney. You should establish a relationship with an accountant or a tax provider or financial advisor. You should pastor, because hey, that's a good time to have one now. So you know somebody's covering you. So you just want to make sure that you do these things in advance and not make it up as you need it. Make it up. Now, sit around and think about, what does my business need to survive in 2020? What do I need to be able to make sure I can survive? Because no one saw this coming. And by the time those who saw it coming, it was already here. I was on the phone with friends in China in December. Of course, I went on the phone talking about the virus. I was on the phone planning my trip back to China, to Beijing, to buy shirts and jackets. And sure enough, my friends in Beijing was like, "You're not coming here in April like you always do." And I was like, "Why not?" And they're like, "We have this virus thing that's starting to pop up." So I had a heads up on that because I had friends in China. So what did I do? I in turn started telling my clients and everybody I could about what's coming. And it was kind of like when I called my mom down in Mississippi and I said, "Y'all still going to church?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Y'all sitting beside each other?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Y'all holding hands?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Mama, y'all can't be holding hands." "Well, Ellis, the Lord gonna take care of us. We're gonna be fine." I said, "Look." She said, "We ain't gonna die before it's our time." I said, "Mama, you won't die before it's your time, but you ain't got to help the Lord out. He's in good shape by himself. So if y'all just stop touching each other." And it didn't get real for her until the police came and said, "Y'all can't sit next to each other." And I'm talking small town USA, that it wasn't real for them. Whereas in Detroit, they watched CNN, they saw all these people dying, but they still holding church and holding hands. So this virus is real. And the threat of a future virus is real. This is not going to be the last virus that we're going to go through. It's going to be other things that are going to come up. This may not be our last time quarantining. I'm just trying to give it to you hard and fast. You've got a plan as a strategist around what happens the next time I have a business interruption. What am I going to do to make sure I can make it through that time period? All right, Ms. Patton, that was a long speech, but I was trying to get the point across.
We appreciate your proactive approach, Mr. Liddell. We have a couple more questions that have come in before we close. One question is, we were told that if you applied for the EIDL program, you should not apply for the PPP program. Do you know or have you heard, is this correct or should that be a concern?
Ms. Pegler, I can take it, but all right, keep this in mind. One program came down, another program went up. There's a strong possibility that the EIDL may never show back up again because now it's popular. The PPP is popular. So that's the program of the day right now. EIDL might come back, but right now the PPP is the program. So most people never apply for both. You only apply for one or the other. Just like Ms. Pegler applied for EIDL for ELE-Peagler, and I applied for the PPP for ELE Wealth Advisors or Advisory Services. So I applied for that for my company, but the company we share was EIDL.
Thank you. Our final question, can you speak a little bit about what resources are available for startups?
I'll speak to that. One of the things that we do at ELE-Peagler LLC is to work with small businesses in terms of getting their business registered. The type of business, that seems to be the stumbling block with a lot of people. Should I be a sole proprietor? Should I be a LLC? Should I be an S Corp or a C Corp? We have that discussion with you based on the type of business and the direction that you want to go in. We also talk to you about how to maintain your business records and getting your taxpayer identification number. So we do offer those kind of services at ELE-Peagler. Let me just throw in one more comment about being proactive, and that is how to retain your customers. You have to be creative with that because at some point in time, we're going to come out of this. This is not going to last forever. And you want to be able to tap into those clients. If you have a website, put something out there that's creative that will capture them. Maybe a phone call. But think about things that you can do to hold on to your clients so that when this is over, they're going to be there for you. And what I have in mind are those hair salons and those barber shops. You don't want to lose those clients. So be creative about how you keep in contact with them as well.
Thank you so much for your insight from both of you. We've learned so much from this webinar. If you joined in after the original introduction, my name is Jasmine Patton. I am the Director of Communications and Events for the Southfield Chamber of Commerce. And this is a discussion in regards to the stimulus money and beyond, hosted by ELE Wealth Management and ELE-Peagler LLC. We will most definitely want to share the contact information for both of our panelists. So if you have not officially registered and you receive this link, from a friend or someone who asked you to hop on board, please make sure to put your email address into our group chat. That way you'll stay connected and plugged in. We have hosted over 15 webinars where we share a variety of different information and topics. And upcoming, we have a very special webinar for our Chamber One-on-One. At this time, I would like to introduce the president of our chamber, Mr. Jason Blanks. Jason, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Jasmine.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you to both of our speakers. You guys were excellent in your approach, and the information was spot on. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time and your expertise. For our participants, thank you so much for attending. And I just really would like to encourage you guys to please go to www.Southfield Area Chamber of Commerce, or Southfield, excuse me, www.southfieldchamber.com. We have a new link that is up, which is our COVID-19 page. This link will help you to connect to some small business resources, as well as our upcoming webinars and links to our previous webinars where you will find this. So it is our COVID-19 page. It's our toolkit, and you will find our webinar previous recordings there. Also, as Jasmine said, we have our Chamber One-on-One / podcast, Learning the Podcast from Home webinar, which will be taking place on Friday. And we hope to see you all there. Thank you again for your time, and Jasmine and everyone else. And we will hopefully see you guys soon on our next podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.